So when looking at the front of the skull, we have our frontal bone. We go here to the lateral side, we have our temporal bone. We have our parietal bone, and then we have our occipital bone. Each one is separated by cracks. These are called sutures. This one is called a frontal suture. If we go to the front of the body, you can see the sagittal suture up here, sagittal suture. And that one goes all the way to the very, very, very posterior end of the skull. And then this one, where our occipital bone, is called the lambdoid suture. Lambdoid suture, and we're at the posterior end of the body now, of the head, pardon. And so as we make our way here, you can see that this temporal bone has its own suture there too. This is called the squamosomal suture. And then if we progress here, this temporal bone has this process called the zygomatic process that's going to go meet the zygomatic bone, which is the cheekbone. And this cheekbone is going to have a little process. You can see it makes contact with the temporal bone. And that little process here is called the temporal process. This is going to be our external acoustic meatus. And if we go just a little bit anterior, meaning going towards the front of the face, if we go just a little bit more, then you'll see we have our mandible, our lower jaw. And this lower jaw has an attachment site, right? This is going to be your mandibular condyle, and it makes contact with this little space underneath that little pit called the mandibular fossa. So the condyle goes into the fossa, forming that mandibular joint. And so in the mandible, that one last turn that we have on the inside, it is going to be almost impossible for me to show, but inside of here, there's this opening. It's right there. That little opening is called the mandibular foramen. Mandibular foramen. It's going to be on the inside of the jaw. That's the only other term that you were given on your Intro to Anatomy bones list. And so next we have our two maxilla bones. That's going to be our upper jaws, maxilla. And then if you look inside, you should be able to see sort of a linear line down. However, the skull sort of has a little bit of wear and tear, so some bones are slightly missing. But remember, off of your list, if you see something on the top like a barrier coming downwards, the top half is going to be your perpendicular plate. And then the bottom half of that is going to be the vomer. The vomer. Try to rely on our notes for that one. And so here you can see the concha. These are going to be the concha that make up the caverns within our nasal cavity. Those are going to be the grooves that you see along the ends there. And then we have our lacrimal bone. It's sort of missing here, but this is where it would sort of be. This is where we have the little crying bone. That's what it's kind of translates over when you think of lacrimal. And so that's that little empty space. There should be a bone there, but that's where it is. It's missing, or just gone. And then with that, I think those are all the structures. And then the last one I think I missed here, external acoustic meatus. There's this bump here called the mastoid process, which is also, if I'm not mistaken, on your list. When we go to the occipital bone, try to remember that the occipital bone is going to be the one that's going to make contact with the first bone, C1. And I have this little model here ready to go for that. And you can see, again, this is your occipital bone, the lambdoid suture. And the occipital condyles will meet the bone below it. So on a condyle right here on the occipital bone will meet C1. So that's always going to be underneath the skull. Doesn't matter where you look at it. It's going to be the region making contact with the C1 bone, And it's a little bit easier if we try to make it out on the skull that's sort of taken apart. I'm going to go ahead and run over here for you. And here you can see occipital condyle, what I have listed here for number 31. That one there. Occipital condyle. You can see how it's next to the foramen magnum, and C1 is right underneath here. As we're looking at this model from this angle, this is still your maxilla, right? We said that the maxilla was the upper jaw, so we're still in that upper jaw. We're seeing the inside of the mouth. And so this first 2/3 is the maxilla, and the last little 1/3, maybe 1/4, right? This little piece is your palatine bone. Palatine bone. And other than that, those are the more tougher ones to find. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to watch the other videos.